Hello, my name is Jeffrey Blair, and I am the National Director of the Remember the 400 Foundation for the USA chapters. And I'm here today with Anthony Ross, who is the Director for the St. Louis chapter of the Remember the 400 Foundation. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to hit a lot of different topics, but first and foremost, let's start with the mission. What is the mission of Remember the 400?
Thank you and welcome. And the mission of Remember the 400. Remember the 400 is a nonprofit organization created by Shadrach Porter, and the mission is to empower our youth to tell the story of the atrocities of Black lives and the contributions globally, as well as to effect positive change in economic equality and social justice where the descendants of the children of slavery reside today.
Absolutely. And that's a mouthful, right? But, plainly stated, it's important for us to always start with our mission statement because we're doing so much, right?
Yes.
I've been part of Remember the 400 for the past, I guess it's going on 3 years now.
Yes.
And we've worked on so many initiatives. It could be cultural, it could be education, it could be working with criminal justice reform, protests and rallies we've participated in. We've done a lot of different things. And so it's important for us that we have that mission so we can always stay focused on what it is that we're trying to do.
Absolutely.
We're trying to heal the racial divide. We're trying to solve problems in the Black community and society in general. But they're so vast and so wide that if we don't stay focused, sometimes we can just get really carried away in so many different directions, So it's good. That's why we wanted to start out with that mission statement, to understand that's really what we're about, healing the racial divide and empowering our youth.
Without question, right? And if you look at Black people as one body, right? We suffer from so many different ailments, right? Where can the focus go? There's so many different aspects you can look at, right? Whether it be education, whether it be economics, right? Whether it be prison reform, right?
Yeah.
All these different entities and places you can go to try to come up with some type of initiative, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's important to always stay focused on what is the mission,
Right?
what was their overall goal,
Right.
and it always helps us to come back to what we're supposed to be doing.
Right. And remember the 400, right? That's why it's so important. I'm so proud of what we have done. Remember the 400. And so again, we've been in existence for the past 3 years, and we've been working on a lot of different things. And one of the things in St. Louis that we're really proud of is some of the partnerships that we've created here locally with the local politicians, with the local social activists, with the schools, with teachers and administrators. Just so much that we've done here. So I know you're really instrumental here in St. Louis in helping to organize the youth, making appointments for them to go to the various school districts and go talk to some of the children about Remember the 400 and why it's important to remember our history. Why don't you tell us a little bit of reflection about what was that like going out to the various schools and talking to the young people who Remember the 400?
Oh wow, it was such an empowering thing to do, right? To go into these schools and to really reach the kids and to see the reception that we were getting going to the schools. One particular event we went to Better Family Life.
Mm-hmm. And Better Family Life is a nonprofit
institution that's dedicated to helping. It's to help impoverished citizens in a sense almost.
Right.
And but their goal is to help people.
It's in the Black side of town.
Yes.
A poor area, let's say. And I know that they have a lot of funding. And they have a lot of children that go through their doors for like after school programs. They do summer programs. They do a lot of different things, for the community. A lot of positive things. So shout out to Better Family Life organization.
Absolutely.
And so we were called in Remember the 400 to assist and to help give them some perspective on history.
For their summer program.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And as well as when we went in to give our presentation as far as Remember the 400 and our history. The children were so moved that one young student wrote a short paragraph thanking us in his hopes of understanding his history as well. And now that he will continue to push forward to learn more about his history, to study it, and to eventually teach that history.
Yeah.
So talk about that, the passion that we felt of, wow, what we did was so powerful.
Yes.
That he took the time doing this presentation to write this.
Yes.
And it moved him so much that now he's going to dedicate his life to learning that history.
Yeah, that's why I love working with young people. I do a lot of work in the community in the various facets, working with young people. That's why I love Remember the 400 and how that is really our focus.
Yes.
Empowering young people.
Yes.
The way I think about it, young people are our future. So if you're really focused on empowering them in the future, that helps keep you in line
Right.
with where you should be. You know
Yes.
what I'm saying? In order to be that guide, that reflection to where we need to go. And so, just kudos to you guys for really doing that, because I think it's really, really important. And I remember the stories that would come back, like you said, it was just real powerful. And there's nothing like helping young people have that moment. I think back to my life. There were certain experiences. There were certain adults that may have said a sentence. Maybe they probably don't remember what they said. But it impacted me so much, even to this day.
Yes.
It changed my life, something that was a teacher may have said. And so having us be able to come in and be able to be those voices that can help empower the next generation, wow, that's really just, it can't explain how powerful that is.
It comes full circle.
Yeah.
And now you see the impact that you can have going forward, and it's just one life.
Yeah.
One life that came to us and said, you guys helped me.
Yes.
But how many others?
How many others? Absolutely. Yeah, and that's fine. We don't do it for the thanks.
I know.
But we do
absolutely.
want to make sure that that we're impactful. And I think that's really, really important. Really important. So so that was one example. Dozens of schools that we went out to in the St. Louis region, elementary schools, middle schools,
Yes.
a lot of impact on people there, and so I think that was something for us to be proud about, something that we can continue to do. So whether you're in St. Louis or where any of our other chapters are, it could be Toronto, it could be Atlanta, it could be in the UK, New York, New Jersey. If you're part of a school district, part of a nonprofit that has that caters to children, contact us, and we can come in and assist with really being able to fill that gap that a lot of times is not there in the school system, it's not there in the textbooks, but it's important for our children and our young people to understand who they are and what's taken place over these past 400 years.
Oh, without question. I know one of the questions that we always receive when we go up to these schools and doing different events is, what does my history have to do with me today?
Yeah, absolutely. The connection.
Why should I learn this?
Right.
Why should I care about this? I'm in the same position that my ancestors were in.
Right.
So why does it matter to me today?
Right.
And so it gives us a great opportunity to really expound on that and to show them
Yes.
we're not in the same position.
Right.
It's just there may be some little inconsistencies here and there as far as what our ancestors did or didn't do, or the appreciation of that, and it kind of gets washed over so much though.
Yeah.
That the idea sometimes is that our ancestors did nothing,
Yeah.
or that it was given to us by someone else.
That couldn't be further from the truth.
Absolutely.
Right? It's important, especially in this age of fake news and just propaganda, and it's important that we tell our children this story. We tell them the real story, the understanding of it, the accomplishments and the atrocities and all those things. I love it, because the only way we're going to be able to solve this problem if we tell the truth.
Yes.
Right? If you go to the doctor and you have an ailment, if you don't tell him the truth, he's not going to prescribe the right solution for you. And like we just started out, our problems are so vast and are in every aspect of life. If we don't take this seriously and be able to go to those painful places. People like to talk about slavery. People don't like to talk about the atrocity that's taken place over these past 400 years. I understand that. I don't like talking about it either. Only to the fact that it's going to help me, number one, respect our elders and forefathers that came before and the sacrifices that they made to get us to this point in time, but also to help me solve or work on a solution going forward.
Yes.
If I don't know what happened before, I cannot put together a viable solution going forward. So it's important for us to know our past. So that's one of the things that we did. A couple of the other things that we did as we prepared. For people that may not know, 2019, last year, was the 400th anniversary of when the first 20 Africans came enslaved here at the shores of Hampton, Virginia. So many of you may have had that in your textbooks, the first 20 in Virginia. Yes. So that was in 1619, in August 1619. And so now, in August, which is Freedom Month, happy Freedom Month, everybody, in August 2019 was the 400th year commemoration for that. And it was a global commemoration for that.
Yes.
And thanks to the guidance of the founder of the 400, Shadrach Porter, who we were preparing for this 2-3 years before that, that we actually organized all of the various chapters globally to work on programs all throughout the year and culminating at an event that took place at the very site where those first 20 came and touched the shores of English America, which would become the United States of America. and ushering in that new age of enslavement here on these shores, here in the Americas. So we planned for that event from St. Louis. We were able to organize, promote, and we actually got a bus trip, the trip that we actually organized to bring young people out there and participate in that event, and it was very, very successful.
Oh man, it was a once in a lifetime event. And you heard before, significant events happen in history, and they say once in a lifetime, right? Talk about the Million Man March, talk about the March on Washington, right? All these different things that happen. But think about this, one time in history, the 400 years.
Right, yes.
And to be a part of that, and that journey, it was so surreal.
Yes. Standing
in the very same spot. But the marker is
right there.
To let you know.
Was right at that spot. Yeah.
To be there.
Yeah.
To see that history unfold in front of you.
Yeah.
Was such a remarkable.
It was
a remarkable day.
I couldn't even. I don't have words to express, but it was, and to have the young people there, so they could see and be witnesses to that, right? And so that's a big part of it. To be able to pass that on to them, that experience. Now they can take that throughout their lives and help empower them going forward. 400 years is not that long of a time.
No.
A lot has happened, but it's not like thousands of years ago. 400 years, and the direct impact. One of the most memorable parts of that is I got to meet the Tucker family. The Tucker family are the direct descendants of 2 of those 20 who were on that ship, and they still live there in that area today. And to get to meet them and talk with them and to converse with them, I mean, it really put a level of seriousness, a level of connection there to kind of see that,
Yes, because it was almost like when we talk about our history sometimes, it's almost we're talking about it in a world where we know it existed, but we don't know the realness of it.
Yeah.
We don't know that serious nature of the impact of, not even just slavery, right? But even just existing in a world where you're viewed as a commodity.
Yeah.
You're counted like animals.
Yeah.
And to see that and to like you said, to shake the hands of the descendants.
Yeah.
It's just like, wow, this is the descendant of 2 of the first 20 Africans.
Yes.
They're still in the area.
Yes.
That's the part that was mind blowing to me with that. They're still there.
They're still there. Yeah.
That legacy is still intact.
Right. And you know what's interesting about that? As we talked about this a little earlier, a lot of them, the family, the descendants, didn't know they were the descendants.
Yes.
They didn't know. A lot of them did not know. Now when they go back early on, they had individuals in the family who would try to pass on the history, but because everyone is so busy just moving on,
trying to live,
they didn't really think about that. Not until a historian, as we're getting up to this point of the first 100 years, not until the historian had come and started to do research on that, they were like, hey, do you know who you are? Do you know who you are? So it's just ironic, right? If you think about it, right? Because that's kind of our message, maybe the 400. Like, do you understand who you are? And so it was surreal. It was surreal. And I think also we didn't just attend the event in Hampton, but we were chosen. Remember, the 400 Foundation were chosen by the city of Hampton to facilitate their youth stage program and area. Wow. So we took care of the whole thing for them. And it's because of what we stand for, Remember the 400. And that was a real proud moment for us. And
absolutely.
It was amazing.
Absolutely. To be chosen to take part in that is just, it lets us know the mission we have, how passionate we know we feel about it.
Right.
And it shows outside organizations just that passion as well.
Yes.
And for them to see that and to see that serious nature of which we take our history with, right? We don't just comb over it. We don't just say, or we don't just, do the highlights, right? We don't just talk about those people in history that everyone else knows about.
Right.
We take all of our history.
Right.
And say we want to learn and study all of our history as well as teach that history.
Absolutely.
So it was such a special weekend.
Absolutely, it was. And then also last year, just to go over our conference again, just to let people know that we've been doing this for a while, right? And so when we talk about August for Freedom Month, we know what we're talking about, right?
Yes.
We've been doing this for a while. We understand the dynamics of what's going on, and trust us. What we suggest are valuable solutions for us moving forward as a people. And one of the things that we're proud about as well in the St. Louis area is that we were selected by the Missouri Humanities Society, and we were awarded a grant and given an award for teaching Black history in the state of Missouri. And so we're real proud about that.
Absolutely.
As well. It took place last year. And one of our biggest accomplishments just now, and this is all leading to our initiative for 2020 in making August Freedom Month a national holiday locally and globally. Part of that national initiative that here in Missouri, we were able to get our resolution from the state Senator Brian Williams initiating August as Freedom Month. And we're really proud about that.
Yes.
Shout out to Brian Williams for being able to
Yes.
always be a supporter of Member 400. He helped us even with the bus trip going out last year. If you remember,
He was our first person to ever donate to us.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
And the mission has touched him greatly, and it continues to touch him, and he continues to support us. So
Right.
definitely big thank you to Senator Brian Williams for all his support.
Absolutely. And so and we're thankful for the resolution to be the first of many elected officials, not just in Missouri, but also throughout the country, also throughout Canada, UK, throughout the, what they call the African diaspora, to make sure that we in one accord can really acknowledge August as Freedom Month, right?
Yes.
So very much. So we have a lot to get into this today for the program. We're going to be talking a lot about healing the racial divide, but also looking at it from a local lens, right? In St. Louis, what's the significance of St. Louis in our history over these past 400 years, and why is that important? So we're going to get into that a little bit. Our theme for today is our fight for freedom, and as think about fight for our freedom, it also goes right into healing the racial divide.
Yeah.
Healing the racial divide, which is a part of the vision of Member 400 Foundation, is a part of our fight for freedom. And when we talk about fight for freedom or any fight, it all depends on what the environment's like. A fight for freedom could take a lot of different forms. And so it's important for us to sort of examine what type of forms are we taking, right? Depending upon the type of oppression we're trying to come out from under.
Yes.
Right? So our fight for freedom is healing the racial divide. And that term, healing the racial divide, we're working on healing, but we're working on healing the racial divide. So we have to understand, well, what is the racial divide that we're trying to heal, right? We're not talking about just helping people to feel better about each other. That's not what we're talking about, right? We're not talking about that. We're talking about healing the injustice that has caused the racial divide.
Yes.
Healing the injustice that's caused the racial divide. That takes action. That's not just feel better about people. It's about understanding the institutions and the policies that were put in place to get us where we are today, and then dismantling them and creating better systems that are going to ensure equality for all, and that no one is going to be prevented from reaching their full potential.
Yes, and not having the despair, right?
Right.
Even going back to the child asking me, what does my history have to do with me today?
Right.
And understanding, right?
Making those connections are so important. It's a good question.
Yes. And without having that racial divide, even the area which he lived in.
Right.
Right? There's the history behind that, behind why you live in this area, behind why you go to the schools you go to.
Yes.
Why you shop at the stores you shop at.
That's right.
Everything you have available, all these resources, it's a reason why. It's a reason why this is Better Family Life and you are here today.
That's right.
And understanding that is so key and instrumental into going into our history.
It's instrumental because some people make the false conclusion, right? That they hear about slavery, and if it's not taught properly, people think that's the first time Black people ever came onto the scene is during slavery.
Yeah.
Other than that, it was back with Tarzan in the jungles.
I'm happy they rescued us.
Absolutely, this total ignorance, and it's not their fault. It's as older people, it's our responsibility to teach the younger generation. It's our responsibility to make sure that the schools we send them to teach them the real story about who they are, right? So it's not their fault, but that's the information that they're getting. And so they think, okay, you have slavery, enslavement, and then you look around and you see the disparities in the neighborhoods, and we think it's just a beeline from there to here. And it's like, there's a lot that's happened.
As if everyone chose to be there.
Right, exactly. It chose to be there, or just let it happen.
Yeah.
We don't understand there's been a fight for freedom in every generation. There's not a generation that has not passed from going back to the 400 years and that Tucker family, 1619, and the fight that they had. Every generation since, there have been heroes, that there have been individuals who have tried to fight for our freedom. And so any freedom that we do have, it didn't just happen. It didn't come out of the benevolence of other people to kind of give us these freedoms.
I feel bad now.
I feel bad for you. Freedom never came from somebody feeling bad. Freedom always came from people fighting for their freedom. Freedom
Yes.
is not free. And we have to be willing to take the sacrifice necessary in order to make it happen. And we have to honor those who came before, who made those sacrifices for the freedoms we take for granted today.
Without question. I always say when the narrative of slavery, right, when it's used in that format and you know it's just wrong, right, I always tell the children, think about this. We are here today because we are the descendants of people who refuse to die,
That's
who
right.
refuse to lay down.
100%.
They said, you know what, my children are going to have a better life than what I have today.
That's right.
And if we just let that go and just let it on down, it's all for naught.
That's right.
It's all for naught. Some of our greatest heroes of history, it'll all be for naught.
That's right.
If we just let our history go to waste.
100%. And then we have a generation that's going to come up and think, oh, this is just how it's been, it's okay. And then when things happen like George Floyd, when things happen like here in St. Louis, Michael Brown, when things happen with the disparities in education and academics and business formation and criminal justice and all those things, they're like, well, what happened? This is the land of the free and home of the brave. Why is this thing happening?
Or the narrative is pushed that, oh, they're just lazy. Or
Yeah.
they just,
Yeah.
is this, if they really wanted it, they can go get it. I can do it. Why can't they do it?
That's right. That's right.
And if we don't understand the history of how that all came to be,
Right.
it's like you were saying,
If we don't understand the battle, then we won't understand the type of fight we have to apply to that battle in order for us to win.
Yes.
Right? And so here, we just talked about right here in St. Louis, we're trying to focus on giving local perspective to these issues. Here we have a real thing in St. Louis that's called the Delmar Divide. The Delmar Divide, right? I want to explain, because you're from here. I'm a transplant. I moved here 10 years ago, but you were born and raised here.
Yes.
Explain to people what the Delmar Divide is.
so Delmar is a street in St. Louis City. And on one side of the street, you have black people, and on the other side, you have white people.
And this is a street that goes pretty much through all of St. Louis
yes.
County. And actually, it's one block down from where we are right today.
Yes.
And it goes all the way through.
It goes all the way down. But the ironic part is, there's an intersection. It's Delmar and Kings Highway. If you stand there, literally, in the direction you turn, you see nothing but the spur. You see, abandoned buildings. You see liquor stores. You see check casting places. You see all these different things. You turn to the other side, and you see all these immaculate buildings, all the new buildings, everything else that's there, and it's like, wow. But for me and my family being here, it's one of those things where that's just what it is.
Right.
There have been many fights about this, and no one. The ironic part though is, even with that divide, they want everyone to pay the taxes the same amount.
Wow.
Even with that disparity.
I know when I first moved here, and I would see that. I mean, you would drive up the street, like you said, Kings Highway, as a matter of fact. 'Cause when I first moved here, that my job was in that area. And so I would drive from, let's say, the white side, the business side, the prosperous side, and I would drive up, and we see all these big buildings and these gated communities and all these lawns you've
Yes.
seen. And you go a few blocks up, and you're like, oh my goodness,
Where
that
am
was
I?
a bomb. Because there's hardly any buildings, number one. And some of those are like halfway broken down or burnt out, and you just look at it, and it just makes, what changed from a few blocks there to here? And so the Delmar Divide, and most cities probably have a similar thing in
Yes.
America, right? Back in the day, they would say railroad tracks would
Yeah,
divide,
divide,
right?
yeah.
Well, in St. Louis, the Delmar Divide, Delmar Street are those railroad tracks. You could have one house on this side of those tracks. The value of that house could be $50,000 or something like that. The same exact house on this side would be like $300,000. It's just the disparities are just so profound when you look at it. And so those are examples, because out of that then comes what services, drugs and crime, school systems and test scores, health disparities, COVID, and all those other disparities that takes place. All those you can trace to where they live,
The
where
locations.
we live, and the locations. Well, how did all those come about? That's why it's important for us to look at our history here in St. Louis to see how did those things come about.
So when we talk about the racial divide and talk about their local history, I think it's important to go back to, well, where did Missouri come from?
Yeah,
How did everything even come about?
you're right. It wasn't part of the 13 colonies. So right.
So
right.
part of that history, though, it comes from actually a large portion of the United States was owned by the French, And the French had a great army, right, led by Napoleon, and everyone's familiar with his story, right?
Napoleon, which is he almost conquered the whole world. Right?
Yes.
And he's in my history book, he was Napoleon Bonaparte, and I believe he was noted from France, and it was when France was at its height.
Yes.
And he was supposedly one of the greatest generals of all time.
Yes.
That's what I heard. One of the greatest generals of all time, Napoleon Bonaparte. Yeah.
Yes. So you can imagine, right? So how did the United States get their hand on, well, not the United States then, but how did the colonies get their hand on this land?
Yeah.
Well, Napoleon went to do battle against a nation that he was not prepared for,
Yes.
which today is known as Haiti,
Mm-hmm.
and he was soundly defeated by Toussaint Louverture and his men.
Yes.
And the defeat was so sound and it was so severe
Yes.
that it decimated France.
Yeah.
It decimated the French to the point where almost had like a firehouse sale.
Yeah.
Everything must go.
Yes.
So with that defeat came along, okay, now we have to sell this land.
The Louisiana Purchase.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But now here's this land, and now the colonies have their hand on this land. Now what to do with this land?
Yes.
So now we get into that story of, okay, now we need to kind of navigate this land. We need to kind of know what we got our hands in now.
Yes.
So now enter Lewis and Clark.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so now we have this process of Lewis and Clark. Okay, they kind of need to discover this land, report back, so we see the resources we have,
Yeah.
what we don't have.
Surveying and mapping. Yeah.
Absolutely. But the issue was Lewis and Clark had no idea on how to navigate.
Right.
So they took a young slave
Yes.
named York.
Mm-hmm. York.
York.
Yes.
No last name.
Uh,
Who navigated them through this region.
yes.
And I think it's one of those things, right, where I know here in this region, we hear it all the time. Lewis and Clark, they have Lewis and Clark Trail, Lewis and Clark this, Lewis and
Yeah.
Clark that.
Like I'm not even from here. Right? I'm from New York, New Jersey area, but that was in my books.
Yes.
About Lewis and Clark and how they were just pioneers who went and navigated and mapped and charted out, the majority of, I guess we call the Midwest now.
Yes.
Way. Yeah.
But and it's one of those things where York is never mentioned.
Yeah.
Or if he is mentioned, it's mentioned as like, oh, just something along the side.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, he was the navigator.
Yeah.
He led them through these lands.
Yes.
How significant is that?
Right.
How significant that this young man, right, who of course we know was a slave,
Yes.
in order to do that, to effectively navigate them through land that none of them had ever been through.
Right. Right.
And it's just that history, right,
Yeah.
of really understanding of how it all came about, right, especially going back to the racial divide,
Right.
right, and you see it like today of Lewis and Clark, not a single mention of York.
Exactly right. Yes, the misinformation. That's why it's important for us so that when we talk about the oppression of slavery, of course, but also talking about even through those times, as a slave, still the significance, contributions that we have. America will not be America without our contributions.
Without
Remember
question.
the 400. You remember the 400 years of oppression? You remember the 400 years of resilience as a people? And understand, he wasn't utilized just for his physical,
Yes.
but also for his intellect and for his wisdom, because he was instrumental in communicating with the various Native American tribes that they encountered all throughout those lands. Land wasn't empty when they purchased it, right? Yeah, and so they had to have the people that could be able to communicate with them and be able to negotiate with them as they would go, through their travels throughout this vast land. That's an amazing story. What I love about it too, number one, our contribution. Understand, we were here and an integral part of every facet of history of the Americans, right? Also, number two, it shows, quote unquote, the globalization of our impact.
Yes.
Think about this. If Toussaint Louverture didn't do what he did, and to be that mighty force, and to become the greatest general who beat one of the greatest generals, and fighting for freedom for us in Haiti, we wouldn't be here in Missouri.
No.
Right? Because that forced Napoleon to have to sell. He had no more money. He had to do something.
Yes, I have to recoup my losses.
And that's a big deal. Don't forget, this was the New World. Europe was dividing it up and fighting for the New World. Spain was fighting for Portugal was fighting for the New World.
Yes.
England was fighting for the New World. France fighting for the New World. To have to sell, I mean, that's failure, right? That's failure. We're trying to expand, and we have this big piece of land in the New World. We don't have it anymore. Why? Because of one of us. Because of Toussaint Louverture's intellect and might and strategy in defeating him in his fight for freedom.
Yes.
So I just love that connection because it shows how we're all connected. We cannot have this fight for freedom just in Missouri or just in America, or just in Canada, or just in the UK, or just in the Caribbean. We're all connected. And so that's one other reason why August for Freedom Month is so important, because it gives us one point in time throughout the year to connect, to reflect and remember, but also to plan globally, and not just
on that level.
On that level.
Without question.
Yeah. I'm now joined here with Sarah Blair, who is one of the youth leaders for the St. Louis chapter, Remember the 400. Hey, Sarah.
Hi.
Yeah. So you've been listening to some of the segments we've done so far.
Yes.
Our theme is Fight for Freedom. So far, what do you think about that theme, fighting for our freedom, and focusing on our local perspective?
I think especially in the context of what we're dealing with now in America, Black Lives Matter movement, I think the youth have this connotation that this is a newer movement, but I also think it's important, especially we're always talking about history, to realize that it's not the first time we're fighting for our freedom. It is instilled in us even before slavery in America, so we have never been acceptance of our downfall, of our oppressors and being in that state.
Right.
We've always tried to fight for that. So I think it's really important to highlight, especially in this day and age.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. So for young people, is there a tendency to try, even right now, because it's understandable, right? And as an older generation, speaking of the younger generation, the anger, the passion, the confusion, the anxiety, all those things, it's understandable emotions, understandable these things, right? You should be angry about George Floyd. You should be angry when you see injustice around you, and we should do something about it, not just be like, oh, that's what it is. I totally understand that. But from an older generation, a young generation, does the generation see the value of understanding history in order to help solve that problem today?
I don't think we necessarily understand that value because it has been withheld from us for so long. We don't really see the importance of it. But I think you could even plainly see the difference in children that were brought up in their history and their culture versus children that were not.
Yeah.
There's a more sense of self.
Yes.
And they have this drive to kind of succeed, knowing where they came from.
Yes.
And their history and how hard their ancestors fought for the things that they have, things that they could take for granted.
Yeah.
It really pushes them to say, all right, I'm gonna take what I have received, try and spread that, even try and make myself succeed in this world. So
I got you. So it's almost, we're standing on the shoulders of
right,
our forefathers.
Right.
And
It gives
understanding
you some foundation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, when you look back, you also look forward, right? So, I didn't know I could be a doctor if I didn't learn about Patricia Bath.
Right.
I didn't know that was possible for me.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that type of information, it really makes a difference.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
I can understand that. I
Yeah.
can understand that. So, fighting for our freedom, like in the prior segment, we talked about talking about fight. Fight could take on different forms. We talk about Toussaint Overture from Haiti, right, who actually fought one of the greatest empires ever at that time, specifically Napoleon and the French, in freeing himself and his people from enslavement off of what we know today as Haiti, and that was a fight for his freedom, and that's definitely. But fight takes other forms, right? We know even all through history, and particularly in the month of August, right? We've seen even Nat Turner fight for freedom, right? And by any means necessary, where he formulated and organized to be able to actually fight for his freedom and kill the slave master, right? And kill those that would try to keep them enslaved, right? Fight for freedom. But we also have a lot of different ways to fight for freedom, right? Again, the anger is the same, the desire is the same to be free, but the tool you're going to use to fight for your freedom could be different, right? And so in one situation, as we're talking about St. Louis history, St. Louis was a slave state during slavery. And when we first moved here to St. Louis 10 years ago, the Mississippi divides Missouri and it divides Illinois. So on one side you have Missouri, which was a part, as we talked earlier about the Louisiana Purchase, and Missouri became a slave state, and it was right across the water from Illinois, which was a free state. And the distance of the river is, you can see it right there. I don't know if that's a quarter mile wide at the most. I don't know, but it's like right there. You can almost swim it. You feel like you can swim over there. And I would always go back in my mind and think, this is amazing. So if I was born here, or I'm here in Missouri, I'm a slave. I'm enslaved. But if I look over there, that's freedom. How am I not going to take that chance to go and try to go over the It's right there, I can see it. So that's one reason why St. Louis is one of the big points on the Underground Railroad, right? Was coming from Missouri, going over to Illinois, and then going up to Canada. So I would always think about that when we first came here. So one of the things when we first came here that took place, it was about a year, I think it was 2011 when it happened. There was a slavery reenactment, right? A slavery reenactment that happened downtown St. Louis, which is called the Old Courthouse. I'm here at the Old Courthouse, as it's called here in St. Louis, and this is down not too far from the Mississippi. It's about 1 block away, and actually the street over there is called Market Street, and it's called Market Street because it leads right down to the Mississippi, and that's where the slaves actually would come in, coming down from Louisiana, Mississippi, up to St. Louis, and their auction blocks would be down there on Market Street. We as black people would be the market that they would be selling. This old courthouse is really historical because this is where the famous case of Dred Scott took place. Right here on these steps, actually too, this is where the auctions would take place. Right here on these steps, our forefathers were sold back and forth and bartered just like any piece of property. The old courthouse right now is a museum, but at the time, going back during the time of slavery, the old courthouse was a working courthouse, and it was utilized actually to sell slaves. Now these were not the slaves that just came off of the boat, right? Because we're inland from the coast that would, like from the East Coast. We're on the Mississippi. These would be slaves that would be out of probate. So a slave owner died, and there was maybe the will was contested, or the slave owner didn't have a will, then all his property then would be up for auction by the state, and the state would have those auctions at the old courthouse. And so we went to the old courthouse, and we stood right on the steps, the very steps that our forefathers were sold on, right there. And so the same way how that slave owner would have his furniture and his mule and cattle, or whatever his merchandise would be sold right there, and his slaves as well. And so what happened is that when we first came here, it was the 150th anniversary of the end of the Civil War, and they were commemorating it. And we connected with African American history teacher at one of the universities here. Her name was Professor De Silver. And she was instrumental in fighting for our freedom, fighting to tell our stories, to make sure, listen, all the events that they had planned throughout the year to commemorate the 150th year after the Civil War had nothing to do with slavery. There was nothing to do with slavery. And so she insisted that we have to make sure we never forget this story, that the Civil War that was fought because of slavery. And so one of the ways she did that is one of the biggest events that she had during that year that she got funding for was having a slavery reenactment, auction reenactment on those very steps of the old courthouse.
890 right here, now 9, would you give me 9, would you give me 9, would you give me 9 on the rail on it? I got you 890 and now 9. $890 and now 9. And now 9. All in, all done. Sold it to you, $890. That's a good buy. $890. All right, the next one I'm going to sell here is Lila. She's 56 years old. She's a good commercial cook now. She cook up a stone. She's considered an excellent dining room server, and she's also good at teaching the other slaves. So if you got some little ones, she'd do you right here. We're going to get Lila up on the block. I hope you had a chance to look her over. She's 56, but got a lot of years left in her, you can bet. Let's get her up here, boys. It's cold, and let's get her on the block.
With us now.
Lila's the next one on here.
Where are we taking to inside?
That Lila, we gonna tell the engine right here. He's 41 years old, he's an excellent player. He needs a firm hand, but once you get him home, you get him in line, he won't be a problem for you. Sells with the warranty as part of your estate. Don't you let him worry about it now. On on the Dandridge right here. Bingo. How about 3? Bingo. 3 and a half, 3 and a quarter, 3 and a quarter, 3 and a half, 3 and a half, 3 and a half. I'm the 4 and a half, 4 and a half, 4 and a half. You give me 4 and a quarter. I got 4 and a half, 4 and a half, 4 and a half. Would you give me 4 and 15? I got 4 and 50 and a half, 4 and 75. I'm the 4 and a half and a half, 4 and 75. Would you give me 4 and 75? And 4 and 75. I got strong 4 and 50 and a half, 4 and 75 and a half, 5 and a half bill. I'm at 5 and a half, 5 and a quarter. Would you give me 5 and a quarter? I got 5 and a half, 5 and a quarter. Would you give me 5 and a quarter? I got 5 and a quarter and now 5.50. I got $550 bill and now 5.75. Would you give me 5.75? I got 5.75 and now 5.85 and 5.95. Would you give me $595? I got $8.95 and now 600. I'm at 60 now, 610. Would you give me 610? Don't attack me! I got $600 only right now, 610. Would you give me 610? Hey, I called you 610. It's a bill and now 615. And now 620. Now 620. Would you give me 620? And now 6 and a quarter. I got 625 and now 630. Now 630. Would you give me 630? I got your 625 and now 630. All in, all done. Away, $625. See the club. All right, now let's see if we can't get that louder up there. We got louder. Let's hear it. Let's not linger now. It's cold. We got another one we're going to sell here. Lila, 56, the cook. Bring her on up now.
I don't understand. This is free country. Why we do this?
No!
Apparently.
According to the doctor here, we got Lila, age of 56, excellent commercial cook. She cooked for a whole bunch of them now. She's considered to be a good night service, and she's a good teacher to the young'uns. Yes, she is. This is a valuable one. She got a lot of years left in her. Bingo. How about can we get 700? How about 700? Can we get 7? I got 7 and now 7 and a quarter. Now 725 and now 7 and a half. Would you give me 7 and a half? Would you give me $750 bill for it? I'm at 750 and now 775. Would you give me 775?
That's good people.
We have here an order issued by the Court of Appeals enjoining the rest of this auction. The auction is over.
I know the buyer said to sell him now in order to stop. As he said, auction's over.
This one gone? This person, come on
No,
in.
sir. No, sir. No, sir. We did not sell it.
That's the best one in the whole box. Can't help it. You heard the sheriff.
This one's sold?
Yes, sir. How'd you put him in that wagon, too? You want me to transport him for you? I can show this one. He's a troublemaker. You can either walk or we'll just have to beat you. Get in that wagon there.
And so we went to that event, and I got to say it's something. You know, it's one of those things where you can read about something, and you can hear about something, maybe even see it on TV, but to actually be there in the environment, the same building, the same structures all around you, and you know, like Civil War reenactors, how they take it very seriously. So they're dressed the part. You have the white men in their top hats and their overcoats. You have the white women with their bonnets and their shawls and their big hoop skirts. You had the soldiers there with their muskets, making sure they keep the peace. So they went all out for this. They cut off the streets. There was no traffic out that day, and it wasn't just a few people. It was hundreds of people all going through this reenactment. And if you remember, they even had they got an auctioneer that could come out and actually do, you know how they speak, you know, give me 5, give me 5, give me 20 over here, and it was sold over here. So, you know, there's that whole, you know, how they would do that. They had the sheriff out there with his rifle, keeping order. They even had a set of Quakers, right? White people who were there as they were going through the slave auction, and they were actually, talking about, this is wrong. We shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be selling human beings. And just talking about the terms we use today, white allies, that would be, you know, a part of that struggle and fight for freedom. So they went all out. And it was, when I went, I remember just I felt like I was really transferred back to those times. Do you remember going to that event?
Definitely. I definitely felt, even I was like 12 at that time, even I could feel the importance and significance of events like this. Like, I remember the way they situated it is that you're part of the crowd that's like bidding on the enslaved.
Yes.
And even that felt surreal.
Yeah.
If you're just talking about history and how that could teach you just the pure knowledge of your past, it just made every fight for freedom, for rights of Black people, for the freedom of enslaved people, more powerful.
Yeah.
Like, you were fighting against this. Like,
Yes.
this is exactly what you were fighting against. It was just being put in there. Like I said, it transported you to that time.
Yes.
And it made me feel like, how could I just stand here and let this happen? Like, I
Right.
kind of wanted to shout out and be like,
yes.
this is wrong,
Right.
even knowing it was in a reenactment.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree. It was something else to really experience. I still remember it very vividly in my mind. And there's one part that really stuck out at me. There was a mother and a daughter that were being auctioned. And when they were auctioned off, two different people bought them. One family bought the mother and one family bought the daughter, so they were going to be split. And they had, again, they went all out. So they had the carriage come up to Cove that was going to take the mother away and take the daughter away in two different directions. And they had a horse-drawn carriage. And the mother, the screams that she made about that happening, don't take my daughter, no, don't take my, the way that she was, they were actors that were going into this, but you could tell she, it wasn't acting almost, I mean, it was so passionate, and the screams I still hear to this day. And I think about, that was just one incident, that was just one scenario, but this was a daily occurrence in the lives of Black people. And us and our forefathers, what they had to go through, what they had to deal with. So imagine what she's going through, but imagine we're there experiencing what are we going through. What am I feeling about me and the power that I have to protect my children and my family? I mean,
I think a lot of times history and it's like things like that, from our perspective as being not in that time, is more of accepted history. Like, of course that's a fact, slavery happened, but when you're actually at an event where it could transport you to that time, it's like unbelievable. Like, this was actually how it worked. Like, this is the emotions that they were feeling.
Yes.
My ancestors were feeling this, going through this.
Yes.
I could barely stand there. I can't imagine
Absolutely.
being the person that's being auctioned off.
That's
So,
being
yeah.
auctioned off, and it happened. So it was surreal. The courthouse is also famous for another event. And again, this is like St. Louis history we're talking about, but I think we already see how it impacts national history, right? And how we're all connected, no matter where we are, the UK, Canada, New York, doesn't matter, or the Caribbean, Western Africa, wherever we are, we're connected. And we have a lot of events that took place that connects us all, like we just talked about Toussaint Overture and Haiti. So another event took place here is this famous case of Dred Scott that took place at the old courthouse. For those you don't know, Dred Scott, he was enslaved, he was married, and had a family, and he was owned by a military personnel who traveled from Missouri. He went over to, I believe, Illinois, to a free state, I think it was Illinois, stayed there for a little time, came back to Missouri. And so at this time, this is just before the Civil War, right? And at that time, there was a lot of fight between the free states and the slave states. And so some of the laws that were mentioned, like, hey, if I'm a free state, right? Like I said, Illinois is a free state. If I'm a Black person and I'm a free state, and then I'm a free person, right? I may not be equal, that's another question, right? But I'm free, right? I'm not enslaved, right? So even if the slave catchers come, I can show my papers, no, I'm a free student, free citizen of the United States, so, I'm free. And so a part of that too was, well, since he lived for a time in a free state that outlawed slavery, how can he still be considered a slave? And so that was his legal argument. So we talk about fight for freedom. His fight for freedom was actually going to the court at the old courthouse and fighting for his freedom through the court system, right? And so, long story short, just a very famous case, the Dred Scott case. You definitely look it up and go through it because it's pivotal to our history. He actually won his case in Missouri. So people want to talk about Missouri sometimes, right? But the truth is, he won that case. But his owners, continued to fight, try to gain it back all the way up to the Supreme Court, appealed it all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the reason one of the parts why it's significant is that the people who are in the free states and the abolitionists who are trying to get rid of slavery utilized that as one of those watershed cases that they really put a lot of focus on as it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. But that's where the Supreme Court, the official highest court in the United States government, made their decision to say and turn and reverse the Missouri court's decision. And what they said, first of all, he doesn't have any standing to ever be in this court because black people have no rights that a white person is ever have to adhere to, right? Black have no rights to be in this court to ask a white person or to challenge a white person on anything. Number two also said, because black people are property and is the property of this white person, we can't take away property from somebody. So therefore, he is property and will always be property of this white person. And so that decision was one of the catalysts that caused the Civil War. Shortly thereafter, the Civil War came about because that was it was the famous Dred Scott case. And so that all happened right here at the old courthouse. So it's just interesting, again, when we talk about our enslavement, these past 400 years, we talk about the oppression and our accomplishment and resilience as a people to go through these 400 years, that we don't have to go to the textbooks. We don't have to go and think about, the big global issues. Right here in our backyard, and I'm sure if everyone would look locally, you'll see pieces of that history all the way through. And it's important for us that we don't forget that. Understand our fight for freedom comes in many dimensions, in many forms. Our fight here in St. Louis could be different than the fight in New York. The fight in Florida could be different than the one that's in Toronto. The fight in UK could be, and so on and so forth. But it's important that we understand our history so, again, we can move forward in putting together lasting change and progression in healing the racial divide. But we have to understand our history first.
Right.
Yeah. So, I'm going to end up this segment here, but for Dred Scott, you learned about it in school a little bit, a lot? Was it significant, or did it just, what?
Honestly, I remember all in high school, Black history was a little paragraph in this huge textbook, so I don't remember going over it in school, but what was significant was actually going to the courthouse and seeing the courtroom.
Seeing it for yourself.
That it was actually, this was actually fought in.
Yeah.
Even that was very surreal. Just the experience of walking through the halls that he did, trying to fight for his freedom.
Can you imagine that? So we're here, and it's just like, we talk about, healing the racial divide, fighting race and racism. A lot of times, people are thinking we want to keep white people from being racist, right? Like emotionally, that don't be racist, don't be racist, and that's not really it. It's like we said, being at an event and going to the courthouse and you're at a federal government building where the officials have guns and the force of the law and the force to be able to take life if necessary to implement their will. And the structures are those big columns all around you. It's so mad. It sort of symbolizes the weight of the system that we're really fighting against. It's racist systems that we want to fight against, and the systems that keep us enslaved. So think about the strength and the courage it has to be for me, this lowly, Dred Scott, this lowly individual who is enslaved, but I'm trying to fight for my freedom against this mammoth system. And I'm there by myself, and I definitely had white allies. He had a white attorney that assisted him. I forget his name, but definitely, make sure we had allies all throughout our history. But to be there, and the majority of people, I'm here trying to say, I'm a human being. I shouldn't be enslaved. I got to talk to the judge and the bailiff and the attorneys and all these things, and I still got to, that takes a lot, right?
A lot, especially when all your life you've been told you're nothing.
Right.
You'll never be more than what you are now.
That's right.
To actually find that inside of you, that courage and that power, it's very, very
And that's
powerful.
key because I see that in the young people today, that they don't take George Floyd sitting down. They don't take Mike Brown sitting down. They don't take the disparities they see in the education system sitting down, right? We're not going to take it passively. It's that's what I'm trying to say with the young people. It's that same passion Dred Scott had to have to be able to stand up against that big system to say, I'm going to fight for my freedom.
Right.
So I applaud young people for what they're doing, but I want us to really respect those that came before and learn from them before. The fight takes many different forms.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So and when you fight, you are part of that long legacy of fighters. So you make us really proud.
Right. You have tall shoulders to stand on.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you have good perspective, and it's just really important. I think that we really highlight some of these points in history, and hopefully it can be helpful for us to start craft together our solutions moving forward.
You know, I love hearing the segment about Dred Scott because it was such an integral part toward the Civil War.
Yeah.
Right? Not too many years later, the Civil War happens, right?
Yes.
And even thinking about it, mentioning the Civil War, right? The Jubilee that our ancestors had, and we're finally free from this turmoil, from the fields, from the hands, the whips, the lashes, everything. We're finally free of that.
Right.
But that can have been so much further from the truth.
Right.
So much further from the truth. Even to go as far as to say, so that era is commonly referred to as the Reconstruction Era.
The period right after the Civil War,
Yeah.
Reconstruction Era. Yeah.
Going right into it, right? The rebuilding of the South, right? But the turmoil was so great that the federal government had to station troops in these former slave states so that black people can exercise their rights,
Right.
exercise their freedoms,
Right.
right? How crazy is that, right?
Right.
You just fought the bloodiest war in this country's short history,
Yeah.
and yet you still wanted more bloodshed,
Right.
and yet they still had to station them there and say, okay, you guys are free. And we accomplished so many different things during this era.
Right.
We held office,
Right.
all these different institutions. We were proposing laws. We were getting things changed. We were headed in the right direction.
Yeah, we had people in Congress. We had a lot of local government. Again, when we were not oppressed, we were not kept from being able to participate in the political system. We thrived.
Absolutely.
We obtained land, started businesses. We had there was so much during that time of occupation. And when I think about that, for people who maybe hard time to understand what that could look like, you can imagine our occupation in Iraq or in Afghanistan.
Yes.
Where we have thousands of soldiers there to control and make sure that things happen the way we want them to happen.
Yes.
Occupation. So right after the Civil War, even though the North won, they had to have the troops stay in the South as an occupation to enforce the freedom of us out of slavery. Right. Out of that, the beginning of that really is Juneteenth. Right.
Absolutely.
That's the celebration of Juneteenth, right?
Absolutely. That Jubilee, we're free. Galveston, Texas, right?
Yeah.
Last one to say, and we celebrate that every single year, right? It's such a huge accomplishment in our history.
Right.
But even going back toward the Reconstruction, right? Then the funny aspect of that, right, is when you talk about those political parties and what it is today is the complete opposite of what it was then.
Yeah.
And
like a
Democrat, Republican, and the
yeah.
parties, and what the mission of each party was.
Yeah.
But through and the promises that failed, right? Talk about the 40-acre and a mule promise, right?
Right.
And how none of that ever came to fruition, right?
Yes.
Even to this day, right? And that conversation is still ongoing.
Yeah.
But once they come to compromises, right, of say, okay, we'll remove the troops from the South.
Yeah.
Then it's you can imagine.
Yeah.
You cannot, and I'm even sure, right? Even our ancestors was probably like, well, it'll be okay, right? They're not doing anything, right?
Yeah.
Because if they're stationed there so long, sometimes you even forget the purpose of them being there.
Right.
Right? You start to learn names. You kind of start, everything
Yeah.
is normal.
Right.
But once they were removed,
Yes.
that's when, and it was quoted as being said, it was worse than slavery.
Worse than slavery.
Worse
Time
than that.
after Reconstruction is considered worse than slavery. Yeah. And that's where you have the leasing, economic leasing started. That's where you have the lynchings, right? So a lot, the lynching exhibits that the museum that just was opened up a few years ago, even the postcards where they show the lynchings, where towns would get together to have the lynching of us, and they would take pictures and then sell postcards back and forth, individuals, like this barbaric things that took place. All those things you talk about, that didn't take place during slavery. That took place after Reconstruction, during the time that's called Jim Crow.
Absolutely. You have to show, think about it, vacancy laws. You have to show ID that you work. You have to show proof that you work.
Yeah.
Even in 2020, who can show proof that they work every single day?
Right, exactly.
And
Yeah,
having
how do you
that-
do that? Exactly, yeah.
And going through that,
Yeah,
and all just that constant, perpetual hell that they were living in every single day.
right, absolutely.
Which spawned them to say, I must get out. I have to leave, right? By any means.
Absolutely.
Some of them save money in order to, travel to places, like Chicago, like, New York, New Jersey, even here in Missouri.
That's right.
They wanted to do anything in order to
Right.
get out. A lot of them just walk.
Yeah,
They did not care, think about that.
right.
It was so bad that they literally left everything behind and just walked. I'm going to walk to wherever I can go. I want to walk to the warmth of other suns.
Absolutely, yes, that's right.
That is just it's so amazing to even think about that.
And you think about, because this is one of those things where fight for freedom, and again, as black people, our forefathers, every generation had to fight for the freedom. Nothing was given to us, right?
Absolutely.
And even when we fight and get a victory, the pushback ends up being even worse than the fight that we were fighting for in the first place.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So you can imagine going through that. We have the whole nation, the United States government, the North against the South, fighting, about us.
Yes.
And for our freedom, right? And we're there too. We're also enlisting
Right in the
fight for our
middle of
freedom
it.
and trying to, and we're thinking like, if we win this war, it's going to be good.
We're free.
We're free. If we win this war, it'll be free. We win the war, right? And then we have the backing of the United States government in order to enforce our freedom and making sure. And during those times, we had 99% voting. We had people in Congress. We had businesses, and some people did get land and did get certain things. But as soon as the North and South made the agreement to pull the South, the troops out of the South, as you said, then they came back and took all that land back, and they imposed all these laws and rules and restrictions that made it so bad and so oppressive. Lynching, right? One of the things when I would get the stories about lynching, a lot of times we think the lynching, it was like maybe just once or twice, or maybe it had something to do with maybe a black guy whistling at a white girl, whatever.
Oh, no.
You know the number one reason why people were lynched?
What's that?
Because they were business owners.
Wow.
Because they were started a business.
Wow.
Black entrepreneurs were the number one reason why. Because it was threatening either their economy or because they were too uppity. You can't have you being too uppity.
Wow.
Like a lot of the black codes and things had to do with, we want to make sure when you were enslaved, you knew your place.
Yes.
Because legally, this is your place. As we just talked about with Dred Scott, the highest court in the land said, you are property, and you have no rights to come before me and demand anything of this white man, right? Now that you're quote unquote free because of the 13th Amendment, because of all these rights that
All
you
these
now
laws
have,
that
all
were
these
passed.
laws, okay, all right, but guess what? These black codes now are going to make sure you understand you are nothing. So you can't drink from my water fountain. You can't stay in my hotel. You can't own property. You can't if you have a business and try to make money, then no way. We got to make sure we put them in their place. So just think about that system and that oppression that's on top of you, and now that fight for freedom is going to take a different form.
Yes, because now it's then it was the physical change.
Right.
Now it's a system we're fighting against. It always was a system we're fighting against.
Right.
But now, how do we fight against this system where these laws are so crafty?
Mm-hmm.
Everything is being done, and now there's even the fight of federal level and local government. They have that fight between them. Okay, who has rule? Who has rule?
Exactly.
Who has the ultimate authority over
That's
this?
right. Especially when the federal government now is siding with the local government. It's like, well, you guys do what you want to do.
We're gonna leave it up to you guys.
You guys figure it out. What are we supposed to have the one to go to? We don't even have the abolitionist movement to go to anymore.
Oh, that's done and over with.
Because it's done. All right? The goal was the end of slavery. Okay, slavery's done. But wait a minute, I'm still not free.
Yeah. I'm still being viewed as property.
Right.
Now it's of a different tactic. Now it's sharecropping.
Right.
And now I'm gonna put you right back in the field. Yes.
Right back, right. So I'll just go through the scenario. So here we are, individuals who were enslaved to this plantation. The Civil War came, we fought for it, we won. During Reconstruction, while the soldiers were there, I'm fine. I can
live my life.
I can get my land, do my thing. Now that's over, and we start with the Jim Crow laws now. Some of the laws now can come take me. They will arrest me for anything.
Put me right back into slavery.
Put me in jail and lease me out to the very same plantation I was a slave at a few years earlier. That's, it baffles the mind, right?
Oh my goodness.
So what our forefathers had to go through and endure, like you said, we have to give them honor that they endured this, they fought through it, did the best that they can so that we could be here today and continue to fight for freedom. It's not over. It's to continue, and it continues on.
Oh, without question, that's right. And we do such a disservice sometimes when we disregard that.
Yeah.
When we just say, "Oh, that's just history. That's just history." It's like, no. To say that I'm going to do this by any means necessary to ensure that my children do not have to suffer the same fate.
Absolutely.
When you talk about social injustice, right? This is the beginning, right?
That's it.
There was no concept of police.
Yeah.
There was no concept of jail.
Mm-hmm.
None of these constructs even existed.
Right.
There was no need
It
to.
was formulated all around our oppression. These systems were created based upon racism and oppression on us. So when we talk about healing the racial divide, we're talking about healing the racist systems that we have in us. These are the building blocks of where they all start.
Absolutely.
What we see today, these are the building blocks that we're speaking about, right?
Absolutely.
And so one of the ways that St. Louis is a specific part of this era is because one of the points that people would come after they, like I said, fight for freedom. One is I can stay and fight against these individuals that are trying to oppress me here in the South, or I could go and migrate to someplace better. And one of the places they would come to was Missouri.
Yes.
Because Missouri was that gateway city that they could come. Because we're right, as I mentioned earlier, they're right in the Mississippi River, which goes all the way down to Louisiana, passes, Mississippi, and all the way up Tennessee, all the way up, and comes all the way up here. So it was, that was the path on the way towards freedom, similar to the path on the Underground Railroad. Right?
Yes. Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
It was right here in St. Louis. And so, interesting enough, in doing some of the research, we could see in some of the historical records in Congress, in Washington D.C., some of the Southern senators arguing on the floor and talking about this great migration. And their issue was these individuals. This is our labor force.
We have to stop them.
If they all just can move out and go west and go north, what are we going to do with our systems that are here, right? With our businesses that are here, industry that are here? We have to do something. So, but the crazy thing is, we'll stop oppressing them, and then maybe they'll stay and work, and you guys can work together.
Yeah.
But like, no, it was more important for them to keep the hierarchy, right? The caste system, of black people being lower and white people being higher, than to think about, well, how do we work through to make sure we just have something that works for everybody.
Exactly.
And they weren't interested in that, right? And so the term that they called us when I'm doing our migration from the south, leading up to St. Louis and to the west, the exodusters.
Yes.
All right, do a search of that when you get a chance. The exodusters, because like the children of Israel going out of Egypt looking for a better land, that's what we were doing in our fight for freedom to escape Jim Crow and the South. We were labeled the exodusters.
And wow, you just talk about that history.
Coincidence?
Oh, no, without no. And
exodusters.
And just think about that, because you can almost take on that same mentality. I have to leave.
Yeah.
I don't care how I leave. I just have to get out of this.
And we're family people, even if not for myself, for my family,
Without
for my
question.
wife, for my daughters and my sons. I gotta make a better life. And so my fight for freedom, I'm gonna go and find someplace better.
And that's just is when we look at that history and we really look at it to analyze that history, and like we said, even going globally and even bringing it back down to a local level, it's amazing, right? It's so amazing how you think like, well, I'm just here in St. Louis, hey, what about over there? Look at all the history that's over there. What about them over there? All that history.
Yes.
And doing the research is just like, wow, look how much history is here.
That's right. That's right.
And even throughout all the world, but it's one of those moments where you just like, wow.
It's more relevant.
Yes.
It's relevant, right, that's here to you. So to answer that young man's question earlier, right? What does history got to do with me? It has everything to do with you.
Every single thing.
Right? If these events we're talking about didn't happen exactly the way that they happened, and our forefathers make the decisions that they made based upon these events that are taking place, that kid would be here. He may have been in New York.
Yeah.
He may have been in the Caribbean. He may have been some other place. But you're here because of those decisions, because of those events.
Absolutely. And you cannot forget. And it's always, you have to continue to remember and continue to push forward.
Absolutely. 100%.
How's everybody doing? My name is Blair. I'm a youth leader here in St. Louis chapter, and I'm here with Anthony Ross, and he's actually the head of the St. Louis chapter. And so I've been listening. I've been in the background listening to kind of everything that's been said so far about healing the racial divide, about all the stuff that not only Remember the 400 focuses on, but also all the stuff and all this, just the big movements that have occurred throughout history. And so Remember the 400, we're proud to be a part of that current movement and here in starting in 2018 and moving on now in 2020. But also reflecting back on the past movements that have occurred before us. And so one big thing that I know is discussed a lot is even in St. Louis, all the rich history that is here in St. Louis, even just as a youth, sometimes we don't even get told these things, especially in school. These things aren't really taught to us. And so without Remember the 400, I really wouldn't have any knowledge of kind of all the rich history that even St. Louis offers. And so I know we talked about like the Louisiana Purchase, Dred Scott, the Exodusters, and so I heard about this city called Kinloch. Is it Kinloch, Missouri? Kinloch, Missouri. And so and just like the rich history, and I'm kind of finding about this recently. And so it's something that is, as I'm learning about it, it's really speaks to like not only the importance of understanding your history, but even understanding why things the way they are. We talk about St. Louis and how segregated the city is, and the Delmar Divide, and all that stuff. So when it comes to even how St. Louis is structured today, as a youth member, you kind of you live in it, but to understand the history of how we got there is important because it shows you kind of not only how you got to where you are, but also how we can move forward as well. So yeah, what do you know about Kinloch, Missouri?
Oh, absolutely, right. And you make such great points, right? It's one of those things where our history sometimes is just viewed as the highlights, right? And which is why an organization like Remember 400 is so important, right? Because we're detailing all of that history, right? We're not just discussing the highlights. We're not discussing those known names, right? We're diving deep into that history to really pull up the roots and to really take hold of it and to really continue to push forward, right? Yeah. So, but part of the history of this great city like Kinloch, Missouri is you have to go back, right? Yeah. Even going back to the migration, right? After Reconstruction, right, as bad as it was, right, and all the dispersal of our ancestors, right, and they moved all across the country, right? But the one place they settled was Illinois, right, East St. Louis to be specific, as well as Missouri. But, you know, and one of those things, right, every time we settle, we just want to live our life. We want peace, we want equality, but we just really want to live our life and raise our families, right? But even then, in the year 1917, right, on one particular day, right, normal living, go to work, come home, trying to raise a family, right, that one of the worst massacres in this country's history occurred, right, which is commonly known today as the East St. Louis riots, where hundreds of black people were murdered in the streets, right, men, women, children, right, getting off the trolley, coming home from work, being pulled out their homes and just decimated in the streets, right? I mean, when you hear things like that?
This is post-slavery.
Yes, this is post-slavery. I mean, what do you think about that, right? Trying to just live your life, and you're still under this umbrella of slavery. You're still under this oppressive state.
I think, even thinking on that, a lot of times there's a narrative out there where they say, yeah, you should be able to pull yourself up from your own bootstraps. You should be able to pull it together, right? As a people, like, what's wrong with you guys? How come you guys can't get it together? But it seemed in history where we have multiple examples of whenever we try to advance ourselves, us constantly they're being pushed back, and them trying to tear us down. So a lot of times I think hearing stories about this, it just reminds you of the narrative that you cannot, it reminds you that you cannot accept the narrative that black people do not try and fight for our freedom. Black people does not try and fight for our independence, and black people have been passive throughout history. Because clearly there's so many examples in which that is not the case, in which we try and advance ourselves. We talk about cities in East St. Louis, you talk about cities even such as Black Wall Street in Oklahoma. So there's so many examples of black people trying to advance ourselves. We were in government, we were in
senators. Like, so we try to do so much for our community, but a lot of times, whenever we make advances, they make laws, they make statements. Then even if they have to do illegal ways in order to get us to go down into the pit that they want to keep us in. So yeah.
Yes, and think about how unfortunate that is, right? But it really, I like to put that focus, right, on the resolve of us, though, right? To really say, right, we've never really had that help, right? I mean, of course, we've had help, right? And I don't want to make it sound like we haven't had that outside help in order to help us get there. Right. But for the majority of the time, it's always been we have to pull ourselves out of this. Mm-hmm. We have to really try hard and unify in order to do this, right? It was never a situation where one person said, I'm going to do it on my own, and you guys can just follow. Right. It was always that unity. But even going back to these great cities, right? Talk about a city like Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Black Wall Street, right? And it gets so much praise, right? And rightfully so, right? When you talk about the what they were able to accomplish in that time span. But even locally here, we had our own Black Wall Street, so to speak, right? We had our own city. So, in going back to Kinloch, Missouri, outside of once the East St. Louis race riots happened, a lot of the families packed up and left, right? I mean, rightfully so. You're not going to stay in this situation. So a lot of them migrated to Kinloch, Missouri. So, but what ended up happening is one man sold a parcel of land to a black family in Kinloch, Missouri. Every white citizen in the city left.
Because of the one black family?
The white flight. White flight. This is commonly referred to today as white flight, where one family comes in and they all leave. Right. Think about that. Think about that. How would that make you feel? That you just want to live your life. You come in, you move into the city, and all of a sudden, all your neighbors are gone. Yeah. Yeah. Right. But that's just the type of thing we had to deal with. Mm-hmm. But what was unique about this situation is that more black people came, and more black people came. To eventually, it was the first black city in Missouri. Wow. And upon being that first black city, and the accomplishments we were able to have within being that first black city, right? We had our own businesses. Mm-hmm. We had our own airfield. Kinloch had its own airfield, mm-hmm. its own theater. Mm-hmm. These are amazing accomplishments considering the time period. Yeah, yeah. But being an own black city, the unique nature about that is that you're surrounded by cities where people don't look like you. You're in these cities. A part of the white flight out of Kinloch was that they literally took Kinloch, cut it in half, and created a whole other city.
Wow. They really were like, nope, we're going to keep it separate.
We're going to completely separate ourselves because we do not want to be a part of this. So now you talk about, what do you do, right? If you're going home, you work late at night, you're going home, right? You talk about Sundown Laws, right? Sundown Laws, you're familiar with Sundown Laws, right? You kind of explain a little bit.
So with Sundown Laws, from what I know, it's basically as a black person, you are allowed in certain cities during the daylight where you can work and you can raise money and just stuff like that. You could work for someone, you can cut the grass, you can do plumbing, whatever what needs to be done. But as soon as after a certain time period of the day, as soon as like the sun would go down, then all black people have to leave the town. You're not allowed there. And so that was, I think that was called Sundown Laws.
Yes, and it's one of those things where the penalty was so harsh, right, which resulted in a loss of life if you were caught in these cities after that time period. And the unique thing about that is Missouri was one of the states that had one of the most sundown cities within the state. Wow. So think about that. Like, think about traveling. Think about this again, trying to exist, right? We're not even saying trying so much to implement change. I'm just trying to live. Yeah. I'm just trying to be a part. I'm just trying to do my thing, raise my family, and just exist. Mm-hmm. And now, on top of the laws against me already, talk about segregation laws, I'm dealing with sundown laws to where I can't be seen in this city after this certain time period.
Yeah. So many regulations were put on our lives. Yeah.
Absolutely, right? But even going back to Kinloch, Missouri, even with these laws in place, these great accomplishments that we were able to have, the businesses, right? Recently, we took a trip to Kinloch, Missouri, and we went to see what was left of Kinloch, Missouri. And words can't really explain the feeling you got driving through Kinloch, Missouri. It was one of those moments where you really kind of had to just take a seat and just kind of really reflect and just really say, wow, this is the sad state that it's in, right? But a part of going through, right, and taking pictures and taking videos is that local residents waved us down.
Really?
And asked us what we were doing, and they were so intrigued by what we were doing that they gave us the more in-depth history of Kinloch. And a part of that in-depth history, the young lady, her father, her grandparents owned these businesses, the same street that we were on. I'm talking about places where there were stumps and trees and just grass and trash everywhere. She was like, no, that was my father's shop, that was my grandmother's shop. Wow. It was so overwhelming for her that the emotion just came out and just tears came pouring down.
So this isn't that long ago then?
Oh no, absolutely not, absolutely not. And just the devastation, and just recently, you talking about 1970s. That she's talking about this city. But a part of the reason Kinloch, Missouri, and the rubble and the trash you see today is, again, it's a part of that institution that wants to come in and say, this doesn't matter, right? Kinloch had no help. Kinloch, Missouri had no help from the state of Missouri in order to sustain itself. It was self-sufficient.
Hey, this is Remember the 400. We're here in Kinloch, Missouri. I remember coming here as a child, living in Berkeley, and my friends would always say, hey, you want to come to our house? But look at the homes now. Look how desolate it is. A once thriving African American community. A once thriving black community, Kinloch, Missouri. Look at what it's reduced to. What's left of the history? It's brought out onto the concrete where weeds are growing wild.
What does that say? The first black city?
First black city, 1885. First school for blacks. 1902, I believe. First black school district. 1910. First air meet at Kinloch Airfield.
They had an airfield.
Wow.
Wow. And flight, first presidential flight at Kinloch. Oh, that's why they took it to use as an airport, because they had.
Wow, I never. Dunbar Elementary School, first
and oldest all-black school.
Miller's Hall, first black-owned theater, 1929.
Oh my goodness. People always talk about Black Wall Street, which is important, Oklahoma City, but what a lot of times people don't understand is that wasn't unique. That's probably the best, biggest, but most towns that they had some, were recycling the dollars, so they're able to create their own pharmacies, movie theaters, airfields, schools, all
post
that.
Office.
Post office.
Once, look behind us. The firefighters are all voluntary now, and on the other side of the fire station are all desolate, once owned black businesses.
That's the 400.
If we don't remember this history.
This is real. This is not something in a textbook. It's not something that's just a story or an article. These are people's lives. And this is what we've been through. One example. This is one story. One town over our vast existence in the United States, in Canada, in the UK. But we have to remember this history because it's real.
But then you talk about the drugs coming in to destroy it, right? And we all know the story about, that epidemic.
Right.
And you also talk about business expansion, right? And and there's always the first cities they're going to come and get are the ones where there's majority black people there.
Right.
So part of that expansion, the airport, was to buy the land of Kinloch, but the residents didn't want to sell, right? Mm-hmm. So they let the value go down and down and down to where now you're talking about eminent domain.
But you're forced to. Yeah.
you're forced to sell. The government can come in and take your land and give you what they perceive to be
a fair market value. Right.
Think about that. What are your thoughts about that? What are your thoughts about just the whole formula of how that's set up in that manner?
I mean, if you think about it, it's that's what you can call a system where you're not designed to win, right? It's a rigged game of life if you think about it, because even analyzing the idea of eminent domain, a lot of times, once again, a lot of times when we talk about laws and regulations, these things have been leaned against black people for so long. So eminent domain consistently continues to affect black communities, and I even have an example. Have an example of where I used to live. I used to live near Kirkwood Mission Park area, and there were similar things happening in that area as well, in which there were big businesses, talking Walmart, Targets, movie theaters, drive-ins, Sonic, a bunch of food places, huge complexes, probably generates millions of dollars every year, and a lot of traffic. But in order for that place to even be, they had to take a lot of black families out of even Nation Park area as well, in order for their business expansion. And so you constantly see this happening. So once again, when you talk about, black people need to pull themselves up, they need to figure it out. But when you're talking about constant regulations and constant not only physical deterioration but also mental deterioration, then it's, of course, you see the difficulties in order for us to grow. If every time we try to grow, they constantly are shutting us down. So even if we talk about eminent domain, the idea that the government controls the system that determines what the value of your house is. So even just that in general is just it's all rigged, because they're like, okay, if something happens, if something were to go on in that neighborhood, right, and something bad is happening, there's drugs going around or there's fires going on and stuff like that, like you can just let those things happen because you know the market value will go down, right? And you just kind of turn a blind eye, and then when you're ready to sell, the market value will be lower, right? And then you can buy those things.
And you have the potential of it, right? Because you set the game.
Right, exactly.
And you talk about getting to that fight for freedom, right? Mm-hmm. But here's a situation, just like Tulsa, Oklahoma, right, where this was an all-black city, mm-hmm, self-sustainable, self-sufficient, own police force, fire department, schools, mm-hmm, all these, everything was theirs. Mm-hmm. It was just theirs. Mm-hmm. And yet, they still could not exist. They still could not just live. To the point to where the young lady whom we encountered even made the statement that when she pulled out her ID and they see Kinloch, Missouri, they will laugh at her.
Wow.
And I understood that growing up, when I grew up in Berkeley, Missouri, and I saw that aspect. I went to school with people from Kinloch, Missouri, mm-hmm, and they had such passion for it. Mm-hmm. And we drove through it as a child, and I'm like, why do they have passion for this? This is nothing around. Mm-hmm. It's rubble, it's trash. But really researching that history and learning, and I'm just like, wow, now I share that same passion.
And even for the people living there, when you're talking about the value of your home, it's way more valuable than a certain check can give you. You're talking culture, you're talking generations of your family living there.
Absolutely.
This is your home, so yeah.
Absolutely, that growth, right? Those experiences, you can't take away.
Right.
But now you can't get it back either. So it comes back to, you talk about fighting for freedom and fighting against that oppressive state, right? Fighting against systemic racism and really pushing that forward, right? And now we see how important Remember the 400 is to bring us that history,
right,
to remind us, to help us to keep going and say, yes, continue to push forward, continue to fight. I know progress seems slow sometimes, right? But if we don't continue that push, think about it. Think if you were born in 1832, and slavery is at its peak, right? And all these different things are going, right? You have no idea what was coming of a few decades later. But even with what was coming, right? You have to continue to fight, continue to push, and continue to say, you know what? If not us, our children. If not my children, then their children, and so forth and so forth. So I really think this going through Kinloch and going through that history and going through St. Louis history and even Missouri history really helped tie everything together, for we can see, right, that it's not just one blip in history. It's just not one time period. It's not just, it happened over there, don't worry about it, forget about it. They're special, they're unique. know wherever you are, you have that history, and it's beautiful, and it's good, and we're going to continue to make history and continue to push forward.
And even if you even think about Kinloch, Missouri, when you're talking about Kinloch, we're talking about one city within St. Louis, within Missouri. But if you're talking about the whole country, imagine how many hidden stories there are that don't get taught in the schools, that our youth have no idea about, that could possibly be the things that inspire them to understand that, look, as black people, you can create change. As black people, you can develop your own businesses and grow yourself. And so I think this is another reason why As Remember the 400 has been important, because I know I've had the opportunity to go within schools and talk to children and talk to kids, and you have as well, we all have, and it's been a great opportunity even to, like, it's great when we hear these stories, right? And it, of course, it impacts us, but when you talk to the kids and the children about it, then they really get a more understanding of self, because they don't get taught that in the school system. So they get an understanding of, oh, that's where my grandparents came from, that's where they came from, and even understanding where they fit into society and where they fit into into history.
Without a question, without a doubt, right? So you have even that aspect, even doing the research and learning about Kinloch, Missouri, and now I'm passionate about it.
Right.
Now I want to reclaim that, and I want to rebuild that, right?
Right.
As an adult going through that, I have that. Think about what that does to the mind of a child.
Right.
To understand that history, to know that, okay, yes, I want to do this. Yes, I want to fight. Yes, I want, because think about this. We were just living.
Yeah.
We were just trying to live. And we were able to create these things. How much
no
more
help,
so?
no help.
With zero help. Zero, no, the outside help. A lot of times the outside was trying to close it in on us, to try to take us away. And say, no, I don't want you to have that.
Right.
But the fact that we were able to accomplish that in the state that we were in, it's such an amazing, so amazing, right? To be able to do those things.
A self-sustaining community, yeah.
And now, here we are, 2020, right?
And they wonder what happened to our communities.
But now we have the opportunity to not only tell this history, but to continue to propel forward and to continue to accomplish so many more things.
Right.
Like here this month, right? This month being our Freedom Month.
Right.
Think about that. August is Freedom Month.
And it makes sense.
With everything we have just discussed, freedom, that fight for freedom. We're going to continue to fight, and we're going to continue to push forward.
Right.
Thank you for spending this time with us as we reflected on Missouri and St. Louis history in reference to the past 400 years, which is really a part of our mission statement.
Which is to empower our youth to tell the true story of the atrocities of Black lives and our contributions globally.
To effect positive change in economic equality and social justice, where the descendants of the children of slavery reside today.
So join us August 23rd and beyond at our various chapters throughout the world as we continue our celebration, our fight for freedom, as well as healing the racial divide. And be sure to check us out on our social media platforms, which is Facebook, Twitter, as well as Instagram, and at rememberthe400.com.
Thank you. Remember the
400!